You are listening to Off the Shelf, a podcast by The Conference Board.
Hello and welcome to this edition of the Off the Shelf podcast, a book podcast by The Conference Board. My name is JP Kuehlwein. I am principal at Überbrands Consulting, teach at Columbia University, and most relevant to this podcast, lead the Marketing Institute here at The Conference Board. And today I will be talking to Dr. Erich Joachimsthaler, who is a strategy, innovation, and branding expert. He is the founder and CEO of the global consulting group Vivaldi, a former and now visiting professor and lecturer at many prestigious universities, including USC, ISE, IESE in Barcelona, and Darden in Virginia. He's a sought-after keynote speaker, and most importantly, and relevant for our conversation, he is the author of a few important books on brand and business building, the most recent one being entitled The Interaction Field, a book that he says is about a revolutionary new way to create shared value for business, customers, and society. Welcome, Erich, to the show.
Welcome. Thank you.
Well, if you are a marketer and you are thinking, well, I've heard this person before, I've read this name, well, it's maybe because you've read some of his bestsellers. First and foremost, the one I got exposed to first is Brand Leadership, which he wrote together with the brand strategy legend David Aker. I think that was around 2000 or so, and he was 15 years old, as he'll tell us later, I'm sure. Or you might have heard him speak at business events, at conventions, or he's very active on social media or the professional media. I wouldn't be surprised if you look back and you see that name pop up. And behind his sometimes lighthearted humor that I think we will experience today, I have no doubt, hides nevertheless a very rigorous researcher with a long academic background. He was last professor of marketing at University of Virginia at Darden, and since then has been very active consulting with big companies and small ones alike around the world. So thanks again, Erich, for taking the time to being on our little show here.
Absolutely. Looking forward.
Now, I think I made it clear that you've got a rich background there, a lot of experience looking at companies from the outside as an academic, as well as working with them as a consultant. So when you say interaction fields are, and I quote you, a revolutionary new way to create shared value, you must think that it is truly a disruptive game changer. Can you put that a little bit in context in terms of what you've seen over the years as business strategy has evolved, and what would make interaction fields so revolutionary?
Yeah, absolutely. There have been 4 industrial revolutions. We are now in the 4th industrial revolution, the World Economic Forum talks about. But for all the industrial revolutions, the first, the second, and the third, the basic business, the way a business or a market was running or was organized was that a company or a farmer or a shoemaker in the old days or a large company would produce something in a factory, would what we call run a value chain or pipeline and produce something of value to the customer. They have marketing people to research the customer, the needs and wants. They have R&D, manufacturing, all the functions lined up in a linear process of producing something. At the end comes a product that is then sold, marketed and branded to the consumer, and hopefully the consumer pays a premium price for that. You know, Deutschland, there is BMW, Mercedes that had taught the Americans that the premium luxury car should look like a BMW, a Mercedes or an Audi, and they have produced a car and then marketed it here in America as the ultimate driving machine for which Americans or immigrants like me we are willing to pay a premium price. That's the classic way of thinking. For hundreds of years, that's been the game. Now there is a change. Along with the fourth industrial revolution comes a new way of organizing markets. And that is not as a linear production, if you will, or supply chain to produce a product, but it is to organize what we call a network. Because today everything is connected. We live in a hyper-connected world. Usually a market connects two sides. On one side, a good example might be Uber. On one side, we have here the author of Uber branding, so I should use Uber or Uber. On one side, you have riders like me here in New York City who like to get a trip done from point A to point B. And on the other side, you have drivers. And Uber is the company that organizes a network between the drivers and riders and matches up the demand, if you will. That's a new business model. Some of these, Amazon has done it with books. You know, you can find books on sellers on one side, and on the other side, you find customers. And these business models have now developed in various forms. And in this book, when I talk about in the action field, I talk about a new way of creating value on both sides. Customers create value, and also drivers create value, and Uber creates value.
Right. It sounds to me a lot like what people generally call platforms, or multi-sided or two-sided marketplaces. Like you say, the Ubers, Amazons, eBays, Etsy's, Airbnbs, etc. of this world. But it seems to me that in your book, you make a distinction between these platforms and the likes of an Uber in particular at what you call interaction fields. Can you tell us about the difference?
Yes, absolutely. See, platforms, and we know very well about those, it's basically a transitional form. It's a form that was written up by two economics or formulated as a marketplace the first time in 1994. Two French, Swiss-French, one French-French, the other Swiss-French, economics wrote an article in a very obscure economic journal. And 10 years later, 2014, so 6 years ago, these two gentlemen, one of them is Jean Tirole, received a Nobel Prize. And when they received the Nobel Prize, suddenly people started to think about this new business model called a platform. Uber became a way to explain that. Airbnb is another form of that. So what happens in the last 6-10 years, what has happened is because technology became available to a degree that it didn't before, because of that, these business models that were first described in 1994 and only got popular in the last years. Platforms is one version. I think that there are three evolutions, and I describe that new evolution. Platforms is two-sided marketplace, usually matching. If you are Match.com, finding a mate, or Tinder, or Grindr, or what it might be, where you find a date or some a significant other is a good example. Open table, where you find an empty restaurant table, if you will. That's a good example of a platform. The next evolution of that, people have talked about until today, is digital ecosystems. And digital ecosystem is a little bit more evolved from just an Uber. Uber doesn't just deliver people from point A to point B, they also deliver your dinner now. As you know, Uber Eats, for example. It becomes an entire ecosystem. Airbnb is probably the best example because Airbnb also offers services by a number of companies on its platform, like cleaning services, insurance, and many other experiences. They are not just anymore matching a traveler with an empty spare room, if you will, in New York City or elsewhere in the world. So this is the second evolution, ecosystems. But I believe that ecosystems are just also a transitional form. Ecosystems are still built on the idea of competition and disruption. Airbnb, as an example, likes or is in the business of disrupting Hilton and Marriott and the traditional hotels and maybe travel agencies, if you will. The whole mindset is still about disruption and competition. I describe in the book, when I talk about interaction fields, I talk about the next stage, that new digital business model that I think is the way go forward, especially now in the post-pandemic world. And that is where you're not thinking about competition and disruption, but where you build, where you're thinking about building participation, engagement, and collaboration. It is the end of competitive advantage. In my model, it's about collaborative advantage, where everybody benefits, and not just Amazon or Jeff Bezos or 3 founders of Airbnb and become 10 times billionaires.
Okay, let's get back to that in a second, because I want to talk about the difference you make between transaction and interaction. But I want to go back to platforms versus interaction fields. We know that the big appeal that everyone describes for platforms is the so-called network effect. You know, it's like the more people go on my platform, on Facebook, for example, then the more attractive it will become. So there's even more people coming and it keeps on building up. Or the more drivers I have on Uber, the more people find the service attractive, the more drivers are willing to sign on. You are talking about unstoppable velocity. Is that in principle the same thing, or is there a difference we need to be aware of?
Yeah, and I can explain you the difference very simply. The network effect means that the more people use a product, the more valuable the product becomes. So value to the product is created through more people or more drivers or more riders, let's say in the example of Uber. What is happening, right, or the same with Amazon. More people join Amazon Prime, translates into more offerings on the supply side, third party providing on Amazon, and that creates that network effect. Who benefits right now then from the network effect? I think it's Amazon, right? I think it's the second most valuable company in the world, something like that. And Jeff Bezos, the richest man in the world. And what happens is that what I describe when I talk about velocity is right now what you see with Airbnb. Who gets the value from the network effect? The value is captured primarily by Airbnb. That makes Airbnb a more valuable company. That's why it was valued over 100 billion last week when it did the IPO. Who gets the value from Amazon? Well, primarily Amazon and the shareholders of Amazon. What if, and this is the interaction field model idea, what if the data, the value that is created through the network effect isn't just captured and then monetized, as you will say nicely, and then attract the shareholders? What if you actually share it with an entire industry or multiple industries? Let me give you one example, which is one of the examples I use in the book, and that is John Deere. There are hundreds of thousands of farmers that share data with John Deere and 100,000 farmers that compare the productivity of their land, the soil condition, the plant health and things like that on a daily basis with other people, other farmers of the millions of farmers. Only 100,000 right now. So there is a network effect because the more farmers participate in this network, the more value is created, right? John Deere organizes that called John Deere Open Platform. Now, in the traditional way, and the way a traditional platform works is Amazon captures most of the value, Airbnb captures most of the value. John Deere is different. They share those data also with fertilizer companies, or with crop companies, with agricultural universities, with researchers. And all of them look at the data and they collaborate in order to improve the productivity of the farmer. So everybody benefits. If John Deere just captures it for themselves, as it is in a typical platform, then they sell more tractors and make more tractors more efficient for certain soil conditions, for certain plant health conditions and things like that, and make recommendations to the farmers, and just are in the business of making more money for themselves. But John Deere thinks like an interaction field company. Everybody benefits. because not only the farmers benefit, not only John Deere benefits, but also the crop companies benefits. Bayer, in this case, formerly called Monsanto, or Syngenta, or Dow Crop Sciences, and everybody benefits. Even agricultural researchers benefit.
Right. So I understand, and you could extend this, of course, almost endlessly, and you could say weather forecasters benefit, and agricultural researchers benefit, etc.
Yep.
The question, I guess, if I was looking at this critically, and let's say I'm Airbnb, I would defend myself and say, but I'm about interactions as well, because after all, I get a 15% share of that income of the host, but they take away the majority of the money. Plus, as you described, I'm starting to create services. Service industries are pulled in, people who manage properties, as well as services created by others. I'm just the enabler. And then on the other end of the spectrum, people would say, well, isn't that maybe sugarcoating by saying it's a wonderful world? There is no monetization. Everyone benefits. Don't all of the players in your interaction field need and want to make profit and maximize their profit at the end of the day? What is inherent in the interaction field that assures, I quote you, a fair distribution of the shared value?
The way you create in the velocity is only when you have a fair distribution of value. And the biggest difference to a platform thinking, a competitive mindset that is so dominant, ingrained in this idea of disruption, and everything needs to be disrupted and destroyed because there's something better that comes along somehow. The biggest problem with that is that everybody tries to sell something to the farmer. Let's say that in the John Deere case, John Deere tries to sell the best tractor and competes about the best tractor. Crop companies sell the best crop relative to other crop companies, and everybody is trying to put their hands into the pocket of the farmer. If you buy a John Deere tractor, you basically could also buy yourself 3 Rolls Royces, because it sets you back $800,000 right there. Now, what if John Deere organizes an interaction field? If John Deere improves the tractor, let's say, or Syngenta improves the fertilizer, do you know what's the maximum productivity increase of the field of an average American farm field is? It's about maximum 10%. And that is from 3,500 kilo per hectare to 10% of that. And that will be a huge achievement if everybody who's putting their hands into the farmers' pockets is contributing. If you build an interaction field where everybody participates, shares data, and the objective is not selling my stuff, my tractor, my fertilizer, my crop, my whatever things, advice I can give to a farmer that also can be monetized in this. If everybody collaborates and says, we all are in there together, we collaborate in order to improve the productivity of the farm. Research shows that American farms can double their productivity from 3,500 to 7,784 kilos per hectare. If you do that, you are solving a significant problem. Do you know that still 40 million Americans don't have enough to eat? Let alone, the population growth and the global world hunger situation that we are facing 2050. Do you know that only 60% of water in the agricultural field actually reaches the plant, because 40% is lost on the way? If we optimize just our own sake, our own profits, and we are just optimizing selling more stuff and putting our hands into the farmers' pockets, and then have the government subsidize farmers because most farms actually are not profitable, then we actually really, we actually not serving nobody, only a few shareholders of a few companies. And if we solve it with an interaction field model, we actually really can solve problems. So everybody benefits. Everybody actually profits in some ways by growing. Erich,
it sounds like a great vision. I almost am reminded of a political rally as you talk about feeding the hungry in America. The question I have is your model, for lack of a better word, framework, your model.
Yep.
Is it an automatism, or does everyone involved need to believe in this common vision, or the interaction field will not work?
Well, I think that we all already talk about this. We all believe in it. Last year in August, about 181 executives, CEOs of all the major companies of the, I think it's called the Business Roundtable, signed a document and said that it's no longer about shareholder value, namely making profits for shareholders only, that we are in the world of stakeholder value creation. So also everybody should benefit from that. They signed it, they rectified it. The World Economic Forum is a big believer on that. So the discussion is already around. And think of a company. You yourself talk always about purpose. Well, when you talk about purpose, what are you talking about here? You're talking about solving something bigger than just selling soap or toilet paper, whatever your former company is still selling. I think they may not sell this anymore. But you're talking about a larger purpose. You've been talking to Joachimstaller about purpose. But purpose is used in many ways as a brand or advertising ploy, as a feel-good initiative to make employees feel that there is more to the business than just selling product and making profits. If you build an interaction field, then you actually, and the interaction field model, in my opinion, actually puts the business model behind purpose. So, JP, I think the conversation is already there. We know we have to change. We know we can change. Technology is available today. We are 2020. We are not in 1950, where everybody still needs to drive a car and has a pride of car ownership.
Right. Okay. I think that clarifies it. I do think personally that there is a motivation and a will that is required. It's not automatically happening. There's still enough people, I think, in the world also for whom the biggest goal might be to buy a car.
Yep.
But I think we got your point very clearly. I want to move on because we're very quickly running out of time, and want to look at it from a consumer perspective, which should be dear to you and me and many of our listeners. But before we do that, we'll have a little break.
Can you, your team, or your company benefit from insights such as the ones provided in this podcast? They are immediately available when you join the Conference Board, a membership-based think tank that delivers trusted insights for what's ahead. Reaching across industries and geographies, we bring together our noted experts, senior executives from the world's largest companies, and nonpartisan practical research to help you address your most important business issues. Our membership packages are tailored to your organization's unique needs and budget. To learn more about our offerings, go to www.conferenceboard.org and click Join on the top bar to connect with one of our product specialists.
Hello, everyone, and welcome back to our podcast here. I'm talking to Erich Joachimsthaler, who is the author of the new book, The Interaction Field. And just before the break, I promised we'll get a look at interaction fields through the consumer's eyes. And Erich, you actually use your daughter to give us that perspective in your book. You describe her as kind of the typical modern millennial consumer who wants everything and wants it right now and is impatiently waiting for a very high quality product to arrive at the doorstep within minutes. And that is not only good and useful and what she expected, but also good for society. I think I'm not exaggerating too much, even though it sounds like that. And then you yourself say that might sound exaggerated, but you actually think those are the proper expectations we should have, and that the interaction field is uniquely kind of designed to deliver on that. Can you tell us a little bit about these shopping expectations and how the interaction field responds to that?
Yes, and you please read my book because as I wrote about it, I actually wrote about my daughter Sarah, who is this millennial consumer, if you will, and
Right. In San Francisco, I think, or California.
yeah, in Los Angeles, in fact.
Los Angeles,
Um,
there we go.
and when you think about it, for the as long as I can remember, we have had this idea of customer experience. And I think customer experience as an idea or as a concept, as a business concept, is actually a flawed model in some ways. Because when I think of my daughter, for her, once she has one experience, she always looks for something else. It's always not enough. And I think that the more important concept is not to meet a customer experience or create a customer experience, but to meet the rising expectations of customers. Think of ourselves. When I came to the United States, 95 or something, Amazon started the e-commerce. And I remember doing my first purchase of something. And the only reasons why I did it was because I wanted to know whether it really works. It really works that you could do something on the computer and actually the package arrives somehow. It arrived sometime, I don't remember how long it takes. Then suddenly what happened is we got this expectation that when you want to have something delivered, you want it delivered in 2 weeks. Then it is 1 week. Then it is 1 week free or $20, and then you get it within 5 business days. Then it is suddenly Amazon shows us, I call it the Amazon effect in the book. Then Amazon does it 1 day. Now, if you think of groceries in New York, Amazon delivers already by the hour. So if Amazon would have been spending their time on customer experience, they would have said, we have a customer experience, and that is around delivery within 1 week or 1 month or something like that, and that they would have to revise that message all the time. What Amazon has done is build a business model behind the idea of convenience, of getting something in time. And because of what you mentioned in the previous section, JP, namely that network effect, Amazon improves over and over again. They get better and better. The network effect that we talk about and I talk about in the book, or learning effects, are designed so that the business model allows you to go from 2 weeks to 1 week to 1 day to 1 hour of delivery. That's what we need to achieve. That's what we need to build a business around.
Okay, now we would be amiss if we were not talking about brands. You've already talked about marketing and how that might be replaced by simply delivering on what the consumer wants. Who needs to market if it delivers in such fantastic ways? There are people we both know, and I know you don't want to mention names, that say brands are no longer a thing. They are not necessary, because if I'm Amazon and my end goal really is, you don't even think about needing it yet. You don't even know you're pregnant. I will already prepare for all the goods you need for your baby that you don't even know yet you're going to have. That's kind of the ultimate vision. And there's going to be one pipeline. It's going to be direct from me to you, and it's going to be seamless. There is no branding needed in that. There is no meaningful differentiation that's needed. There is no meaning that is needed. Do you agree with that? Or is there still room for people saying, no, a Chanel bag is not purely to transport items from A to B, or even a diaper is not purely about keeping my baby dry overnight and having no leaks?
I think that people who talk about the branding is dead are, number one, they talk about this as an old racket. I have heard this 30 years ago. Now somebody dishes it up another 20 years ago, another 10 years ago. And now 2020, somebody else comes around, small-minded people must be, in my opinion, and says, okay, brands are dead, because it's a popular opinion, because we all know that we live around brands. We care for brands. We have emotional connection with brands, just like we have with many other things in our lives. And brands are a part of our lives. To suggest such a stupidity that brands are no longer necessary is just moronic. So I cannot complete that thought. So in fact, Airbnb is a good example in this platform or digital ecosystem in this world we speak. Airbnb is valued what it's valued because of what? Because of the brand. Brands is actually much more important in the interaction field. Why? Because now I need to not only organize on one side of the, if you will, a market, the consumer side, and create a value proposition and a promise to the consumers, let's say for those who travel, and Airbnb does a great job about that. You can read this up if you want. And on the other side, you also have the hosts. They need to create a promise and a value proposition with the hosts who decide on making their castle or their house or their apartment or their room within an apartment available on Airbnb. And besides that, they need to do that with many other ecosystems,
right?
With a provider. So no, I don't think it's even a thought. And I still think that the fundamental idea that interaction field platforms or ecosystem replace the beauty of Chanel or the beauty of a Gucci bag, let's say, or Gucci design is just wrong. It will be a complex collection of benefits that we are looking for.
Right. Now, it's always easy with luxury brand, as a lot of people tell me. But as we studied brand elevation, as we call it, we were looking at Airbnb in depth. In fact, they contributed a guest case study written firsthand for Airbnb, which would confirm what you're saying, that they are a strong brand that people feel attracted to, and that their meaningful purpose of belonging has strong appeal among their biggest fans, which then in turn become advocates. So if we agree that brands at a minimum are about familiarity, or better about trust, or even better about giving meaning beyond the material, as I like to say, then that also translates to power, right? Because if I'm Airbnb versus, I don't know, Travelocity, or versus some even lesser known brands, that means I have margin power. Now, in your model, does it though mean I need to abandon that because you say my model is not about maximizing monetization and trying to amass maximum value on my side, but distribute it fairly? How does the brand then function, and what is its worth if it's not about value creation?
So what happens is that the experience in Airbnb is an example. The experience with Airbnb actually in the hotel industry is that it didn't really disrupt Marriott. It didn't really disrupt Hilton and the hotel companies. In fact, it has been growing the business, because more people have decided that the Airbnb is an alternative to other ways of accommodations. They didn't replace the accommodations. They actually do more. They have done more of. So even in the pandemic, for example, while people say, look, I can't travel, I don't have to travel for business because we are in a lockdown. What people have done instead is, if they have booked longer extended stays with Airbnb in private homes or in private apartments for some. So it has actually grown the business. Marriott has now built also an interaction field model. So what happens is that when you think about value creation, the way you think about it, JP, is you always think about it. This is this wrong mindset that there's somewhat we need to share. When we say sharing, we need to divide something, like in market share, like what you lose, I win, and what I win, you lose. And that mindset needs to stop here, because it is not about the sharing of profits. Because what happens is, everybody benefits. Actually, the market is growing, and that's what we have seen in Airbnb. We have seen this in the insurance business. We have seen this in healthcare, in automotive, in every industry that we research for this particular book. So I think that everybody benefits, and the brands and interaction field models help actually to grow the pie. And so it's even if you give up some profits, if you will, it actually ultimately you're better off together.
All right. Well, Erich, I hate to interrupt you because it's clear that you're very passionate about the subject, but we are running out of time. I guess you might have convinced a few listeners that they want to know more about interaction fields versus doing it things the regular way, in quotes, as you call it. Where should they go to know a little bit more beyond the book? Is there a forum that you've established, an interaction field of sorts for interaction fields?
Yeah, I think it's our website, vivaldigroup.com, is a good source because there's a lot written. We have an interaction field series. We have a podcast, the business of platforms. There's articles on the role of brand and articles on the role of innovation. Also, please call me, write me, text me. And it's very simple to type in my name in the wrong way, and it always turns up to be Joachimstaller, properly spelled. So it's very easy to find me online and on LinkedIn as well. And I'd be glad to share sort of sources, and not my own sources. I know the field very well, and I'd be glad to share the sources that I can recommend. Everybody else is always doing it a lot better than me. That's at least how I feel. So there are better books than interaction fields. But what I think is important that in my book I explain how a traditional company, how an existing business evolves its business. And I think I write some good examples in there, a good framework and a good model, and hopefully that becomes interesting. But please reach out.
All right, excellent. Well, I hope you'll get what you asked for in terms of a storm of people on your email. You, dear listener, I want to thank you first for tuning in. I hope you found this episode inspiring, maybe even helpful. Don't be shy to let us know about it in your comments, your ratings, etc. And of course, let everyone else know, friends, family, kids, and subscribe. There are many other podcasts next to the off-the-shelf one by the Conference Board. You'll find them at conference-board.org/podcasts. And with that complicated address, I want to say thank you again, Erich, and auf Wiedersehen to everyone. Goodbye.
Goodbye. Thank you.
This has been Off the Shelf, a podcast by the Conference Board.